I've given you some of the extensions that were added to the C# programming language. So let's look at how the development is done in the modern application. So when we talk about a modern day application, most of the time we are dealing with a lot of data, the data that is coming from various sources. The data could be there as a collection of objects, or the data can be obtained from the network in the form of an XML, or the usual thing you may have the data in a relational database management system. So in any case, you have the data that is there spread across the world, and you are supposed to develop the application based on that data. Now, when we try to develop our application, there are two distinct things that will come into picture. One is the way we look at our program, that is in the form of an object and the relationship between them, and the data which is there on the other side of the world, which is usually in a tabular format, and the relationship between the two tables, which are foreign key and this kind of thing, they no longer hold good in our application. So there is always a problem with the data and the object. So we are using the object in our object-oriented paradigm, but the data does not depict that object. They are just a flat two-dimensional table. The other problem with that is whenever we think of interacting with the various data sources, every data source has its own syntaxes. Suppose if you want to interact with a database management system, then you are familiar that you are supposed to use a SQL statement, and this is a new programming language, or it's a new syntax altogether. In the same way, if you want to interact with an XML document, there is a querying capability, and that is called as XQuery, and you need to learn the syntaxes of XQuery. So it is very difficult for a programmer to develop an application which is making use of the data that is spread across the world. The other problem with the existing programming language is they tell us how to get the data, but they don't tell what to do with the data. Suppose if you look at a select statement from the SQL databases. So when you say select star from my table, this is the way in which you get the data. What are you going to do with the data? It is not being specified there. So your duty now is to first tell the machine how to go about to establish the connection with the database, use a connection string, use some drivers to interact with the database. So that is the how part. And then you are supposed to say what to do with it. So this is going to be a bit complicated thing. Imagine a programming language that helps you, you don't have to specify to that programming language what to do with the data. In particular, you don't have to tell it how to fetch the data from the database. You just tell it that I want this table from the database and I want to do something with it. And that is going to be a declarative programming language. Now let me come back to the Linq. Now Linq is an extension onto the .NET framework, and this extension is provided partly because of an enhancement in the programming languages, as well as some extra things that are added directly into the .NET. The enhancement into the programming language usually came about with the different things like an extension method, which allows you to extend a sealed class, and the lambda expression, which allows you to write an anonymous function, as well as you can create an anonymous type altogether. And the last one happens to be different keywords that are introduced in the programming language like VB.NET, C# or F#. Okay. Let's look at what is the reason why we have to use the .NET Linq. Okay. Now, when we think of Linq is a way in which you have the querying processor that is directly embedded into your programming language. So that means to say that you are not going out of your programming paradigm in order to interact with the data sources. Now, when I say data sources, I didn't mean to say that it is just the database. Data sources could be anything. Anything that requires the data is the data source. The good thing about having the Linq is, since the Linq is embedded directly into your programming language, the Linq is very flexible. There are, at this moment, you have 50 standard methods are available, that are available within your programming language. And if you want to extend it, the framework is designed in such a way that you can even extend the existing methods to suit your requirement. So it is extensible. And the other part of it is, in order to use the Linq, you don't have to learn something new. It's a SQL-like statement, and anytime you can think of using it. Now, using the Linq, what are the things that you can do? You can traverse to the various data sources. You can filter it. You can project the operations. The good thing about the Linq is, because it's a part of the programming language, whatever syntax that you write is a type-safe syntax. Whereas when you write a SQL statement, when you say select my name or select employee name, employee ID, and this kind of thing. Now, what is the data type that you are receiving from the database? You are not very sure. Most of the time, you make a patchwork by saying that the employee ID is a long integer, employee name is a string, and so on and so forth. So the data types are not known when you run a query. Whereas when you write a query in the Linq, the type is known to the compiler. So at compile time, the compiler can cross-verify and say that these types are not allowed. So when you write the code, you are very sure that you are not going to end up in a trouble at runtime, where usually whenever you use the databases, this problem usually arises. You try to cast the values that are obtained from the database into some of the variables within your method. Sometimes it works, and most of the time they fail. And when they fail at runtime, your program crashes altogether. So this happens because it is not type safe. Whereas when we use the Linq is type safe. So because all the keywords and all the variables are part of the programming language that you are using, you can be very sure that if your program is able to compile, that means it's going to go ahead without raising any runtime exception. The other good thing about the Linq is, when you use the Visual Studio, there is an extensive support for handling the Linq. The Visual Studio will help you out with the syntaxes of the Linq, and so it is very easier for you to write the Linq statement. So what is the thing that the Linq is doing? Linq allows you to make a query against the database, against the XML, or against the in-memory object. So for Linq, everything is an object. You are actually interacting with the object. So the object can come from a database, the object can come from an XML, the object can come from the other type of programs which are running, the COM objects which are running on your machine. In any way, you are just interacting with the various data sources. The good part of it is, in order to interact with any of the data sources, you don't have to learn a new querying syntaxes. The querying syntaxes that you are using for querying a database is same as that of an XML. Suppose if you have used the X query, you would have noticed that the syntax of the X query is slightly different. In particular, it is very different from the syntaxes of a SQL statement. So it is good that if you use a Linq statement, you have to learn only one set of syntaxes, and you can use it across any of the programming, any of the databases. Now, when you look at the Linq, there are three pieces which are coming into the Linq. One is the language syntax. The other one is the operators which are added into the Linq. And the next one is the implementations. So this is usually called as the providers. So I will explain each and every one of them. Let's look at the first part, and that is the language syntax. In order to use the Linq within your programming language, either a C#, F#, or VB, the programming language itself got modified to incorporate new keywords into it, and that is partly done because you don't feel like going out of a programming language when you write a query. The next part of it is adding a new operators. So in order to achieve the Linq capabilities, what they have done is they have added extra methods into the programming, into some of the classes, and these methods help you to query the database and use them. And these methods are not directly written inside any of the class, so you are not inheriting any classes or doing anything. They are all extension method. So in order to use the Linq, you don't have to extend your class out of something. The existing class will work because what is being done by Microsoft is they have gone and they have used the extension method into the existing classes. So the idea of the extension methods, you know very well. When you use an extension method, you are not manipulating the existing class. At runtime, you say that this method is part of the class. So without bothering about the inheritance and all the complication, you can easily write the query. Now let's look at what is the fundamental definition for a query. A query is nothing but an expression that is used to retrieve the data from the source. That is what is a query. Now, when we talk about the query, the general idea that you get is in order to use a query, there is a separate syntax, like the one that you are already familiar, the one that you have been using throughout your lifetime is the SQL statement. Now, the SQL is not the only querying language that you have it. There are other querying languages which you are not studied. At least the one you should have studied is the XQuery, that is used to query the XML, and it is XML has become an extensive part of the data sources in the modern world, and you need to know how to query an XML document in order to retrieve the appropriate values from it. Okay, and this has its own syntax. One of the things that the Linq did was it provided a consistent, that is the same model for working with the various kinds of data sources. Now, what are the different data sources that we can think of using? When we talk about the Linq can be used with the XML document, the SQL databases, any ADO.NET data sets, any .NET collection, and it is not the end of it. The Linq has been extended to provide support for many other things that include the Amazon, that includes the LDAP directories, that includes the Google, and that also includes the Oracle databases and so on and so forth. So Linq has been, in fact, there are many providers that are available in order to use the Linq. Now, what is the meaning of saying a provider? Now, if you look at the general diagram of any programming language, now let's assume that you have a Linq here and you have various data sources. The data sources could be the cloud data which is available, the databases, the XML, or anything. You write a same syntax, the syntax does not change. So when you say that I want to query a database, this Linq somehow has to translate your syntaxes into a format that is recognized by the database. If you say that the same syntax has to be used with an Amazon cloud, then the same query has to be converted into an appropriate format that is recognizable by the Amazon cloud. And if you say that the same syntax has to be used by an XML source, that means the same query has to be converted into an XML recognizable format. And how this thing is done is by the use of a provider. So we have a provider. Provider is like a translator that takes your standard Linq syntaxes and converts into a format that is recognized by the different sources. So we have the providers for the databases, we have the providers for the directory accessing, we have the provider for the cloud, and so on and so forth. We have different types of providers. In particular, whenever we learn the basics, we usually deal with the three different providers, and one of the provider is Linq to object, Linq to XML, and Linq to, in fact, the data sources. Now, the Linq to data sources is divided into Linq to ADO.NET, that includes Linq to dataset and Linq to SQL, and there is one more Linq to entities. You are familiar with the word entities in the last semester. Entities are nothing but the object which knows how to process their data into a particular data source. Suppose if you have entities and if you want to query those entities, how you are going to go about it? Now, in the world of Java, it is very difficult because when you want to query the objects which are created out of a data source, or when you want to query the entities that are created out of the data source, Java, you have to use different methods. Whereas here, it is not a big deal because if you know the Linq, you will be able to query almost anything that has a provider. Now, what is the meaning of saying Linq to in-memory object? Now, Linq to in-memory object is a provider that helps you. Suppose say you have the objects, you have the collection of objects in the memory, and you have your program, and you want to query this object for something. For example, I want to get all the students who are taken the course MCA. So if you want to run this kind of query on the objects which are available here, there must be some magic that has to happen from your program and within the objects which are over here. And this magic is provided by the Linq to object. So Linq to object will take the standard query. I'm not showing you the query syntax, but you have used unknowingly, you have used that syntax when you developed an MVC application, and you have realized that that's not a big deal. Anytime you can write that query, and the query looks exactly opposite to that of a, if not exactly, to somehow a reversed SQL query. So it is like from something and so on. I will show you the query slightly later. So you can use the same query to interact with the object. The same thing is true if you have an XML document. You can query the content into the XML document using the same query, and this magic is done by this Linq to XML. The other thing is true for the others. You must remember one important thing, and that is the Linq to SQL. Whenever it is mentioned as Linq to SQL, SQL does not mean that any databases. It just means that Microsoft SQL Server. So Linq to SQL is you are trying to query only Microsoft SQL Server. You cannot use that provider for querying Microsoft Access or any other databases for that matter. What if you want to query the DB2 database, or if you want to query the Oracle database? The Oracle has provided you with the Linq to Oracle. Use that driver for interaction. Now, what is the difference between this Linq to entities and Linq to SQL? Linq to SQL is a interaction only with the SQL database. Linq to entities is the interaction with any data source. So if you are able to get the entities out of a data source, regardless of the database or the any type of data source for that matter, if you are able to create an entity out of an existing database, and if you want to query those entities, you can use the Linq to entities. One other important thing between the Linq to query and the other one is Linq to. When you say Linq to query, the object that you create in memory has the same structure as that of a table within the database. So this object and this table has one-to-one relationship. What is the difference between this and the other one? When you create an object in the entities, the object need not have the same relationship as in other words, object need not have one-to-one relationship between the table and the object. In other words, the field of the object need not be the same as that of a field within the table of a database. So in other words, when you try to use the Linq to entities, what you get, the model that you get is a logical view of the schema which is there in the database. So this is just a logical picture of the schema. And if you definitely are going to learn about the entities, when you create an entities, what you can do is you can first create the entities and then tell the provider, go and create the table for these entities. Or you can go to the existing table and then ask the provider, create all the object out of this table for me. And you can do that thing. We'll see that in the other classes. Now let's look at the architecture of Linq to SQL. Now at the bottom side, we have various data sources like the object, relational database, and XML. And we have the programming language, and all this programming language have been extended in order to support the Linq. Now between your programming language and the data source, you have the various Linq data source providers. And for every type of data source, we have a provider. Suppose if you want to interact with an XML using any of the programming language, then you are supposed to use the Linq to XML, and that will interact with the XML sources. If you want to interact with the object, then you have Linq to object that will interact with it. And you have Linq to edo.net, which has a subset. If you want to interact with the data set, that is the in-memory representation of the table, if you can use the link to dataset. If you want to interact with the SQL database, you can use link to SQL server. If you want to interact with any data source for that matter, you can use link to entity. So this is a simpler structure of the link architecture. Let's go ahead and let's look at what we can do with a query. Now, whenever we try to run a query, we usually take three steps. One is we somehow locate the data sources. The way in which you do it is you may say a connection string in the edo.net and say that this is a connection string. The connection string will tell the your programming language that this is a place wherein you can get the data source. Now, in our case, the data source could be anything. So, somewhere you have to first obtain that data source. Then, the next thing is you have to write a query that will query this existing data source. Once you query this, you are going to get the result and you are going to execute that query and do something with the result that you are obtained from the query. This is the usual three steps that you are taking, and this is the steps that we will be following at every time, and that's a standard thing. First you locate the database, then you send a query against that database. The database will give you the result set, take the result set and do whatever you want to do with the data set. However, when we talk about the link, you must understand one thing, and that is the link works with any collection of the object that implements I enumerable. So if the collection does not implement I enumerable, then you will not be able to use the link. The reason is the extension methods that are applied to the link are solely available to all the classes that implement I enumerable. So if you have a collection of objects which does not implement I enumerable, it is not possible for you to query them using the link. In that case, there are two options that are left with you. One is you query it on your own way by writing your own customized method. The other one is try to typecast it as a I enumerable of T and then start using the link on top of it. So whenever we talk about the link, we use a sequence, a word called as sequence. The sequence means it's the collection that implements I enumerable. So I may say that we have a sequence. The sequence here just means to say that there is a collection that implements I enumerable. Again, if the I enumerable is not implemented by that collection, you cannot use the link. The reason is you won't get the extension method. Okay. When we talk about the C# programming language, the C# programming language has its own syntaxes, its own keywords. Now, what does the compiler do is it will take the keyword and map that keyword to an existing extension. So, when you say, for example, if you write in your C program, in your C#, if you write where followed by a clause, this where keyword of your C# is actually mapped at compile time to a where method in the extension. So there is a where method, and during the compile time, it will map this keyword directly to that particular function, and it will invoke that function. Now, in order to use the link, you need to, I told you that any of the classes must implement, or the collection must implement I enumerable. Now, what is this I enumerable? What is so special about this I enumerable? Let me go back to the my Visual Studio, and let me quickly create a console application there, and let's see what is there in that interface. So when you try to look at that interface over here, that is I enumerable, you find that it doesn't have many things inside it. There is only one method which is there, and that method is the get enumerator. So it has only one method inside it, and why that is very important is the extension is added to one of the class that is derived out of it. So let's look at that. So let me just write this interface, and let me show you what it is going to do. So if I say I enumerable, So when I say I enumerable, this particular I enumerable has one method inside it, that is get enumerator. What that get enumerator will do is it will give you a object of type enumerator. Okay, I'll talk about that slightly later. What is so special about that enumerator and why you have to use that particular syntax. Let's look at a query in action. So we have a array of strings, and there are these are the names of the games that are being used up. Now I want to get the game, the name of the game whose length is greater than 6. How do I write this query? So in order to write the query, I start with the keyword from G in games. What is the meaning of this is you are telling the query engine that take one G in this collection. What is this collection? This is a collection of a string. It may be names of a person, names of a city, or anything. So there is a collection of string, and you take one string out of that. So pick up one of the string out of this array of element, and then take this G and then get the length of that particular thing. So in other words, you are saying that pick up one of the string here, get the length of it. If the length of it is greater than 6, I want to do something with it. So this where clause says what is the condition or what is the criteria. The criteria here is the length must be greater than 6. Once you pick up one of the element whose length is greater than 6, I want you to order it by the ascending order of that name. So once you select any word that has the length 6, I want you to sort it in the ascending order, and if you just stop the query at this particular point, the query will not return anything because you just ask the query to do the sorting. But the next line says that once you do that thing, select all of them and give it to me. Now when this query is executed, what you are going to get is a collection of I enumerable of strings. Because it's a collection of string, it's an array of string, it's going to return something that is I enumerable of T. So in this case, the T happens to be a string, and that is why you're able to see that thing. So I told you there are two things you are doing. There are three things you are doing. First, you figure out where is the data source. Next, you specify the query. And the last thing that you're going to do is do something with this query. So when you run this thing, you're going to get a subset, and you run a for each, and you pick up one element of this subset, and you then use the console write line to display it to the user. So this is to select the data source, this is to run the query, this is to write the query, and this is to do something with the result set. Very important thing. What happens when this line is executed? So what happens when the at runtime when this line gets executed? It will not fire the query. So you must understand that particular thing. Most of the time, when you write a query, the query is not immediately executed. The query gets executed only when you try to ask, give me something out of it. So at this place, when the for loop runs, the for loop will go to this subset, and it's going to ask the subset, now give me one of the string. When that happens, the subset goes here and then executes the query. So when you write the query, when this line is executed, immediately the query is not fired. This is called as deferred or lazy execution. However, there are some methods like count, average, and this kind of methods. They force the compiler, or they force the runtime to run the query, because if you say I have a count of object, in order to get that count, it has to run the query, and when you call this count method or average method or minimize or maximum method, the query is immediately run. Otherwise, most of the time the query is deferred until the last minute, until the query is absolutely required. The query is not executed, and when it is absolutely required, it fires the queries, retries the values, and then returns it to you. Okay, and that is what is called as the deferred execution. Now let me go back. If the Visual Studio has come, let me go back here and let me try to come to this one. In order to use the Linq here, you need to have a namespace, and that is the system.link. Now, system.link contains all the support classes for the link. In order to use this system.link, you must have a assembly, and that assembly is system.core. Now, the system.core assembly contains the classes which are available under this namespace. So, if you don't include system.core, you will not be able to get this namespace, and if you don't include that namespace, you will not get any magic that can be done by the link. Remember, this is the physical file. This is like a RAR file. It's a physical file that you are trying to add. This is just a logical separation. So there is a difference between an assembly and a namespace. Namespace is logical. It is up to you what namespace you are giving. It can span across multiple assembly. An assembly is a physical thing. It could be a physical file. You can imagine it to be a physical file that exists, that resides on your hard disk, and you are saying to your project that this is the location of that particular file, and if you look at the properties, it's going to say that it is available under some location. So you are saying that that file or that something is available in that location, and I want you, whenever I call some method, I want you to go to that location, find the appropriate files, and then start executing it. So this is what is this one? This is just to avoid the naming conflict. So there is an average method in this one, and you may create an average method in your program. So at compile time, the compiler will get confused as to whether to use your average method or whether to go to Linq and use its average method. How do you distinguish between them? You say that all the average methods of Linq will come under this logical namespace. So the full average method, if at all it is directly exposed, it is like system.link.average. So when I say system.link.average, I'm talking about that average which is there in the link. When I directly say average, it is the average that I have created. So this is where you give the full path of the function or the method, so that the compiler will not get confused. Now let me go over here and let me try to create a integer, and I'm going to say int, and I'm going to just create a array, and I'm going to say that equal to new. I'm going to just type that thing so that when it comes back, you'll be able to see what I've done. I'm just creating a array there, and when I go to that array, you will notice that the same thing has happened. Okay. You have seen the arrays in your other programming language, and you've been using that in quite a while in most of your programming language. But when you use the array, which automatically inherits I enumerable, you will notice that there is a strange thing that is happening with that particular array. And the strange thing that happens is you get additional methods which are part of the array, and you will be surprised to know how come the array has so many properties with it. Now, if you notice over here, I have just created an ordinary array of numbers, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, single dimension, and you notice that there are so many methods which are available to that particular array. And you notice here there is an arrow that says that it's an extension that is being added. Okay, how do I get that thing? I get this thing only because I have imported this namespace. I'm going to cut that namespace from here. So system.link from here, and then I go back to my array and I put the dot here now, and you notice that the array no longer shows all the methods. You notice that the method has been cut short with the ordinary method that you have this length property and so on. So just by including this namespace here, I'm able to get a lot of extension. You notice that there is tons of methods that are being added apart from the ordinary get length and all those things. So you are able to get an extra method. How on earth that the just by including a namespace, the array gets the entire set of methods. The way it does this is it adds an extensions to the array. How it is adding the extension? It adds the extension because there is a enumerable interface. This is an interface. Let me just write that interface, and I'm going to go here. Let's see what it's going to say. It says I want to import something. So I have the enumerable. I press the F12 to take me to the definition of that enumerable. So it will take me from my program to the definition of enumerable. And if you notice over here, enumerable is an interface, and there is only one method that says get enumerator. So there is only one method that is being added over here. What is this get enumerator, and what is the significance of an enumerator? So what is the meaning of saying an enumerator? Let's assume that you have a collection. Now collection could be as simple as an array, it could be a linked list, it could be a other type of collection that you have studied in your data structures. So you have a collection, and I want to get every element of the collection in a sequence. Now the sequence usually depends on the collection. For example, if it is an ordinary list of items, then you are the order in which I have added the elements, I want it to be retrieved in the same way. For example, if you say that it is just a order, it is just a list of element, and if I ask the list, give me one element at a time, so it's going to go to the first element, and for the first time it says this is the first element. Next time if I ask, it's going to give me the second element, and it's going to give me the third element. This is because just an ordinary list. Suppose if I create a sorted list, and then if I ask, okay, give me the element one after the other, then because it's a sorted list, it's going to give me the 1 first, then the 2 first, then 4 and 5, because it's going to maintain a sorted order. Remember, the sorting order need not be the order in which you have inserted the element into the list. So it depends on the one. For example, you may have a binary tree, and you may say that I want you to give me the element in the different order. So for example, you have this pre, post and in order traversal, and if you say that I want you to traverse it in order, then the way in which the elements are given to you is different. Okay? So what is this enumerator? What is the work of the enumerator? Enumerator work is to retrieve one of the element in the order that is specified by the collection. If the collection says it's just a ordinary list, then the enumerator is supposed to retrieve the element in the order in which they have inserted into the collection. If the collection says we have a sorted list, then the work of the enumerator is to get the element in the sorted order. So in any way, what is the use of an enumerator is, if you go to a collection and if you want to ask the collection, I want to traverse all the elements or all the nodes which are there within you, and I want you to retrieve one element at a time in the order that is known to your collection, then what you need to do is you have to get this enumerator. So the work of the enumerator is to help you to go into the different elements within the collection and retrieve one element at a time. So if you notice over here, the get enumerator returns a object that implements enumerator. Let me press the F12 to go to the definition of this enumerator. So I'm now moved from the enumerator to the definition of enumerable to the definition of enumerator. Now if you look at this enumerator, there are three things which are there. The first one is a property, and this property is get. That means It's a read only, it is not a writable property. So you can just ask, give me the element. You cannot say that put this element into that. So you cannot add something into the list. It's just a read only collection. And this, the word itself say the current will give you the current element to which you are pointing. So how does all this thing work? Suppose say you have a collection here, and what does the enumerator will do? When you get a object that implements the enumerator, it will point to the beginning of this, you could say file, or this is the beginning of anything. Okay, and the last one is the, you know very well, any collection has the end. So like end of file, beginning of the file, or end of list, beginning of the list, and so on and so forth. So when you just take a enumerator, the initially it will point to the beginning of the list, not the any element which are there in the list. If you want this pointer to move to the first element within the object, then you have to call next. When you call the next for the first time, it will point to the first element, whichever is true in the logical sense of the collection, it will point to that. If you call it again, it's going to point it to the second element within the list. Again, if you call, it's going to do the same thing. And every time when you call this move next, it's going to return either true or false, stating whether it can point to the next element. When you go to the last element within the list, and if you ask it now point to the next element, it will come here and it is going to return a false, stating that I am not able to point to any of the elements because I have moved to the end of the list. Remember, move is read only and forward only. What's the meaning of saying forward only? It can go in only one direction. You can't ask now go back and point to the previous one. It's not going to do it. What if you really want to do that thing? If you want to do that thing, use this reset. What the reset will do is it will point the pointer back to the beginning of the list, and you can start over again. Now suppose if the pointer is pointing to this location, and I want to know what is stored in this location, I can go to this property and ask the property, say the enumerator is pointing to one of the element, I want to get the value out of the element, and that is done by calling dot current within that property. Remember, all of them are interfaces. Enumerator is a class that implements this interface, and it has 3 methods inside it. Now the question is, where are those extension methods? These extension methods are available in a direct implementation. It's called as enumerable. So I'll go to this enumerable. Remember, there is a difference between writing I enumerable and enumerable. When you start with the word I, the convention is it's an interface. So in .NET, something that starts with I is an interface. That is why you must be extremely careful when you declare the class names. Do not start with I, because you will confuse the rest of the world, because they will think that that's an interface altogether. Let me go to this class and let me see what is there inside that particular class. Again, I'm going to press F12. That will take me straight to the class. And if you notice that there is a class called as enumerable, and you notice over here that class has tons of methods that are declared inside it. I'm not going to go in depth into any one of them, but you notice a strange thing within all this method. All these methods are static, and if you go over to the top of this class itself is a static class, and every method inside it is a static class. And the greatest thing about this every method is every method takes the first parameter as I enumerable of t, and you notice a strange thing in front of all this method, and the strange thing is this. When you put this in front of something, it just means to say that it's an extension. Recall what I have told you in the last month. So when you start a method, and if the first parameter within that method has a word this, that means to say that you are going for an extension. And what does this statement say? You are going for an extension on I enumerable of double. So in other words, this is the place where the link says that all these are the extensions that are being added onto IEnumerable. The list that I have created here, that is the array that I have created here, automatically inherits out of IEnumerable. Because this array inherits from the IEnumerable, and because the enumerable says that there is an extension. I just missed that particular thing. So because it says that there is an extension, the array automatically gets all those extensions added onto it. So when I pull this system.link from my namespace here, what happened? I pulled this enumerator, the other one, which I can show you, out of this scope. And when that enumerator went out of this scope, the array just said that I don't have any more extension. I know few of my methods